So maybe we'll get into it because we're going to kind of be talking about sitting with discomfort. We're going to talk about the topic of the second arrow today. Rachel and I have turned Sunday morning into Sutta Central. It's kind of the Buddhist Bible study. We want to start talking about some of the Buddhist discourses, some of these teachings that were recorded over 2,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago. And I find it really fascinating as we start to dive into the actual discourses and the teachings, just how practical they are to my life today. And so one of the things that the Buddha really leads with in his teaching, if you look at all of the different discourses, is he's pretty firm on this idea that he only really teaches one central theme. He even says himself, I only teach one thing, suffering and the end of suffering. And, you know, a lot of us aren't used to that from our spiritual traditions. And a lot of the Buddha's followers, his students, weren't used to that either. They were like, well, tell me about the afterlife. Tell me about, rebirth. Talk to me about, what happens when I die? Do we have a soul or do we not have a soul? And there's one sutta where one of the Buddhist students, Malunkyaputta is his name, wasn't satisfied with the Buddha's narrow focus. He was kind of being questioned by his friends that practiced other spiritual traditions. And he went to the Buddha and he said, hey, you kind of avoid these topics. Is life eternal? Is life not eternal? Are the mind and body separate or are they the same? After you awaken, do you exist or do you not exist? And this is what the Buddha's response was. He's a little bit of a jerk, but he gets the point across. He says, well, suppose, Malunkyaputta, a man was struck by an arrow that was thickly smeared with poison, and his friends and companions, his kinsmen and relatives would bring a surgeon to treat him. But this man would say, I will not have this arrow removed from my body until I know whether the man who shot me is a warrior or a Brahmin or a merchant or a worker. Or if this man would say, I will not have this arrow removed until I know the name and the clan of the man that wounded me. Or he would say, I will not have this arrow removed until I know the type of arrow and the material it was made from. And he goes on, and the type of feather that was used, and the angle at which he shot it, and it goes on and on. I actually had to abbreviate it because it goes on forever. And then at the very end, the Buddha says, this man, Malunkyaputta, will die, and those things will remain unknown to him. He says, and, Malunkyaputta, why are they not declared by me? Why will I not tell you whether the soul is eternal or not eternal, or what happens to you after you die, or what you should believe in order to experience salvation? He says, why will I not declare these things? He says, because they are not connected with the goal of ending suffering here and now. They do not lead to inner peace, to direct knowledge, to self-awareness, and to nibbana, to awakening. That is why they are not declared by me. And he says, Malunkyaputta, what is declared by me? What do I teach then? This is suffering. This is the origin of suffering. This is the cessation of suffering, and this is the path that leads to the cessation of suffering here and now. That is what has been declared by me. This helped me to trust the Buddha's teaching personally. You know, so much of my life I needed some relief. And I looked to spiritual traditions, and I looked to society. I looked out in the world. How can I find some relief? And I was told, well, believe in this, or pray to this, or go to this, go to that. And the Buddha really says, how can we really investigate our suffering here and now? How can we come into a relationship with it and seek to understand it and what's causing it and what will lead to its end? And in some ways, the Buddha's asking us to do something a little bit harder than just believe. He's asking us to actually look at our suffering, to confront it. And he's giving us the power. He's saying only you can do that. No teacher can do it. There's no special doctrine that can do it. There's no secret teaching. All of his teaching is about doing that yourself, sitting down and looking at the suffering. And so in his first teaching, I thought about teaching on the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. It's all one word. Gives Mississippi a run for its money. Because it's such a valuable teaching on suffering. And it was the first of the Buddhist teaching. But I thought about approaching it in a different way through the second arrow today. But in the first teaching, the Buddha goes to his friends, the 5 ascetics, and he offers this first noble truth on dukkha, on suffering. And he basically says, your task, not your belief, but your task. They should be called noble tasks, not noble truths. Your first task is to fully know dukkha. And then he defines it. What is dukkha? What is suffering? What does it mean? He says, this is dukkha. Birth is dukkha. Aging is dukkha. Sickness is dukkha. Death is dukkha. Not encountering what is dear to you is dukkha. Being separated from what is dear to you is dukkha. Not getting what you want is dukkha. These are his words. He says, in brief, in summary, this psychophysical condition, this human organism of the mind and the body is dukkha. So why? I'm always interested in that last part, in brief, in summary. This human organism. He really says the 5 aggregates subject to clinging, but we're not going there today. This mind-body process of being human is dukkha. Why does he say that? And the answer is simple, and we all know it, and I wish knowing it would help alleviate it, but the answer is simple, is because we live in a human mind and body that wants things to be comfortable. But we live in a world that is comfortable and uncomfortable. And that when we want things to be comfortable, rather than being able to embrace when things are uncomfortable, we suffer always. And it's actually our wanting or needing or demanding that life feels comfortable that causes our suffering. It's not pain that's the problem, it's our relationship to pain. And we see this all over the place, even if we just zoom out into society. You know, how comfortable are we as a society talking about death and talking to kids about sex and talking to kids about race and class and talking to kids about guns and talking about all of these things? They're uncomfortable. They're a part of our reality. So we live in an organism, in a mind and body process that feels both pleasure and pain, that experiences both pleasure and pain in life, but it craves only pleasure. We don't want to get old, we don't want to get sick, we don't want to die. As these things happen, as we age, as we become ill, as we near death, we really struggle. I struggle. My mind says, this shouldn't be happening. I was sick for 4 weeks. I'm just finally coming out the other side of it with something. I went to the doctor, and he couldn't tell me what it was. We took endless COVID tests, and maybe it's RSV. Oh, but there's this flu going around. I had pink eye in both my eyes. My ears were infected. I was coughing. My wife hasn't been able to sleep in the same room for 4 weeks because I'm coughing uncontrollably at night. And I'm like, this shouldn't be happening right now. Like, I should be over this by now. And my doctor should know what it is, and we should be able to treat it. It's like, this is happening. This is still happening. It's like, and I was really grateful for my mindfulness practice because I'd wake up and I'd just be like mentally exhausted, just like beat down. I'm like, okay, but this is how it is right now, And it wasn't this kind of acceptance that is the spiritual bypass, like this avoidance, It was actually like, no, this is my reality. How can I take care of myself today? How can I move through the day with this reality that I'm sick rather than denying it, medicating it and trying to escape it? Not healthy medication, distracting myself from it, or even just getting overwhelmed and lost in it. My first thought has never been to sit with discomfort. And it's still pretty far down on my list, even though I know better. Many of y'all have heard me share one of my favorite quotes by Blaise Pascal. He's a French philosopher that said, all human suffering stems from the fact that we can't sit in a room quietly by ourselves. I'm acutely aware as a therapist when people come in, I have I wouldn't say it's a unique perspective, but Buddhism has really brainwashed me, I think in a good way, is, the thing that they're talking about is not the thing, it's a feeling that they're not willing to sit with. That's the thing. And it's not a fault that I'm assigning by not willing, but a feeling that feels so uncomfortable and so unbearable and that they don't know how to manage. The topic's going to change every week. That's what I've noticed. It's relationship this week, family this week, trauma thing that happened last week, whatever it may be. The topic's going to change. And those topics are important, but it's the feeling that causes the anguish. And so this is one of the Buddha's radical teachings. He's not saying that we don't engage with all of this stuff out here, but he says if you really want to find peace and happiness in this life, and if you really want to find a skillful way to engage with all of this stuff out here, you've got to look inside. He's not saying that's the only thing we do, but he's saying that is a very important thing to do. He's advocating for a deep look into this organism of the human mind and the body. And so that's what we're going to talk a little bit more about, is what is it that we find when we look deeply into the mind and the body. And I'm going to read the sutta on the second arrow. It's called the Salata Sutta. It's sometimes translated to mean the dart. And the Buddha uses this metaphor of an arrow or a dart. You heard it in that other sutta. He uses it a lot. And he uses it in reference to something that you could pull out to stop the suffering. So I'm going to read it. It's a couple paragraphs long. It's repetitive, and it may be helpful to remember that this was an oral tradition for 400, 500 years. So the repetition was to help people remember. And sometimes it's been helpful to me. Like, I've heard some of the discourses so much, like something will come up in my life, and I just have this like over and over again on repeat in the brain. So maybe that will happen to you. So the Buddha says, an untaught worldling, O monks, experiences pleasant feelings, she experiences painful feelings, and she experiences neutral feelings. A well-taught, noble disciple also experiences pleasant feelings, painful feelings, and neutral feelings. Now, what is the distinction or the difference between the well-taught noble disciple and the untaught worldling? He says, when an untaught worldling is touched by a painful bodily feeling, she worries and grieves, she laments, beats her chest, weeps, and is distraught. She thus experiences two kinds of feelings now, a bodily one and a mental one. It is if a person were pierced by a dart and following the first piercing, she's hit by a second one. So now she will experience two feelings, one bodily and one mental. Having been touched by the painful feeling, she resists, she resents it. Then in her who so resists and resents that painful feeling, an underlying tendency of resistance against the painful feeling comes to underlie in her mind. Under the impact of that painful feeling, she then proceeds to escape into sensual distraction. And why does she do so? An untaught worldling, O monks, does not know of any other escape other than into sensual distraction. An underlying tendency to crave and cling to pleasant feelings comes to underlie in her mind. She does not know, according to the facts, the arising and ending of all feelings, that they come and go. Nor does she know the gratification, the danger, and the true escape connected with these feelings. In her who lacks that knowledge, an underlying tendency to ignorance around neutral feelings comes to underlie in her mind. So when she experiences a pleasant feeling, a painful feeling, or a neutral feeling, she feels as she is fettered by it, bound to it, in craving, in resistance, and in ignorance. Such a one, the untaught worldling, monks, is an untaught worldling who's fettered by birth, aging, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. She is fettered by suffering, this I declare. It's a little Dr. Seuss rhyme at the end for you. All right, so let's learn about the well-taught disciple. It's repetitive. But in the case of a well-taught disciple, monks, when she is touched by a painful feeling, she will not worry or grieve or lament. She will not beat her chest and weep, nor will she be distraught. It is only one kind of feeling that she then experiences, a painful one, but a bodily one, not a mental feeling. It is if this person were pierced by a dart still, but was not hit by a second one following it. So this person experiences feelings caused by a single dart only. It is similar with a well-taught noble disciple. When touched with a painful feeling, she will not worry or grieve or lament. She will not beat her chest and weep, nor will she be distraught. She experiences only one single feeling, a bodily one. Having been touched by that painful feeling, she does not resist and resent it. Hence, in her, no underlying tendency of resistance against that painful feeling comes to underlie in her mind. Under the impact of that painful feeling, she does not proceed to escape into sensual distraction. And why not? Well, the well-taught noble disciple has learned, and she knows through her direct experience of an escape from the painful feelings other than just running into sensual distractions. Then, in the person who does not escape to sensual distraction, no underlying tendency to crave or cling for present feelings comes to underlie in her mind. She knows, according to the facts, that feelings arise and pass away. And the gratification and the danger and the true escape from these feelings, she knows. Because she knows that feelings are impermanent. In her, who knows thus, no underlying tendency to ignorance around neutral feelings come to underlie in her mind. When she experiences a pleasant feeling, a painful feeling, or a neutral feeling, she feels it as one who is not fettered by it. She feels it, she's not fettered by it. Such a one, O monks, is called a well-taught noble disciple who is not fettered by birth, by old age, by death, by sorrow, by lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. She is not fettered to suffering, this I declare. This, O monks, is the distinction and the difference that exists between a well-taught noble disciple and an untaught worldling. She's not fettered by it. She experiences it, the pain, but she's not fettered by it. So what fetters us to our pain? The self-made stories, the resentment, the blame, the if only, the self-blame, the when I was younger, I was this way. My neighbor looks happier than I do. If my body looked different than it did then. If I had more money then. Right? I'm just throwing out a few of mine. Hopefully some of these are familiar. What fetters us to our pain? It's this extra layer of suffering that the mind creates. So I feel like the Buddha's being very realistic here. He's saying, yeah, the pain you experience, totally real, not your fault, and it sucks. It's hard. He's literally saying in the First Noble Truth, it is hard. This is dukkha. Birth is hard. Aging's hard. Sickness is hard. Not getting what you want is hard. He's saying, but what causes this extra layer of suffering? Sankhara dukkha. What causes this reactive layer of suffering? And it's this desire, it's not a choice, it's a reflex. This reactive, instinctual sense of, I don't want to feel this. I don't know about you, but if I don't have mindfulness present, if I am the untaught worldling in my day, I'm going to avoid that feeling every time. You know, as simple as just watching my body when I'm in pain, shifting my butt to cross my legs because my butt hurts. You know, like, fortunately, no one's going to be harmed by that. Right? But all these other ways of avoiding pain in my life that I don't know about y'all, but that have caused me a ton of suffering and have caused the people in my life a ton of suffering. My reactivity to not wanting to feel discomfort. Avoiding conflict with people because I don't want to talk about it. You know? Avoiding the reality of my active addiction for years because I didn't know how I could feel and be alive without escape. Like, again, not my fault. I'm not blaming myself. I did not know there was another way. I didn't even know that was the problem. I just thought I liked getting high. You know, so the Buddha's saying, you know, on a deep level that all of our suffering comes from our inability to sit with pain. So what's the difference between the untaught worldling and the trained disciple? The Buddha calls the untaught worldling, I kind of like this, he calls them perpetual wanderers. Right? And it's really interesting because it sounds like a judgment. You know, like I feel like we live in kind of some semi-judgmental society or a pathologizing society. It's like everybody's like, this is good and bad and right and wrong. And, you know, we became parents recently and like the world of parenting and like how to parent your kids. I'm like, oh man, I could have had the best parents in the world. I'm pretty sure I would have ended up the same. Like, my parents were like, did a pretty good job, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't on them, you know? But all this kind of, good and bad and right and wrong, when we hear the perpetual wanderer, it almost sounds like the Buddha saying, like, who are these delusional idiots running around in their suffering? But what he means by perpetual wanderer is he actually means that people that are literally kind of caught in the cycle of trying to find satisfaction through the world, through means outside of themselves. And so they're literally like aimless. They're wandering around trying to find a solution in the world, in pleasurable things and experiences and validation, and they're never getting it. And like, I think we can all relate. It's like the amount of things that I've taken on saying, I'm going to be happy once I finish my grad degree, or once I get this amount of money, or once I'm in a relationship, and it never comes, right? Because it's not those things that make us happy, it's our relationship to all of these things. And so the perpetual wanderer is, he's not judging, he's saying, like, this is when we're kind of caught in this cycle of really thinking actually that we could find our happiness outside of ourselves, out here. The Buddha has a sutta called The Gratification, the Danger, and the Escape. And it says, whatever joy and happiness that lies in the world, he says that's the gratification of the world. He says, but because the world, all of this stuff out here, is impermanent and subject to change, it's therefore pervaded by stress. And that's the danger in the world. He says, once you remove and abandon the craving and clinging after the world to make you happy, he says, that is the escape from the world. That's the true escape. So if you remember, the untaught worldling was escaping into sensory distraction, was escaping into the world to try to fix the feeling. And he's saying the world has a lot of gratification. He's actually saying there is gratification in the world. He said, but because all of these things that you get out here are impermanent, they won't ever fully be able to satisfy you. Do we all agree on that? Like, it's not that the world sucks. I love the world. Take me to a concert, give me a hot dog, I'm all about it. Some of these old translations get it wrong. They say, desire causes suffering. No, desire is fine. It's this thirst. It's this demanding the world to satisfy that empty feeling inside that's never satisfied. Rather than dealing with that empty feeling inside, that's going to perpetuate things. That's where I'm the perpetual wanderer. In Buddhism, the highest happiness that we can experience isn't a happiness that's dependent on external conditions, on what we get from the world. It isn't dependent on pleasures, it's not dependent on success, it's not dependent on praise or validation or someone else's acknowledgement of your accomplishments. The highest happiness in Buddhism is, he says, the removal and abandoning of craving and clinging for the world. It's not what we get out of the world, it's how we relate to these things. How we skillfully engage with these things. And how we have to try to remember, this isn't where my happiness lies. My happiness relies on my relationship to this. So what is the relationship to the world that we're developing through meditation? When things are pleasant, we're trying to fully be present without attachment to it. So we can fully embrace these moments of pleasure and show up for them. Because I don't know about you, but when things are going good, I'm always afraid they're going to end. So I can't even really often be fully present with these really nice moments in my life because I'm like, how do I keep it around? How do I get more of it? How do I hoard it away? I always refer to this as Sunday dukkha, right? Like that. It's like I used to just stay up super late on Sunday, just holding on to the weekend. So how do we show up with non-attached appreciation? And it takes a moment of awareness to say, oh, this is really nice, actually. This word in Buddhism is not a very popular word. It's nikama. It's translated to mean renunciation. But the word nikama kind of means something like not needing anything extra. Like, oh, I don't need to hold on to this moment or prolong it or get more out of it or have the best day ever. Like, I got the day off and that's kind of good enough, you know? You notice this, even when we have a day off, it's hard that we feel guilty doing nothing sometimes. It's got to kind of be an act of rebellion, I've noticed. Like the world is always going to want you to participate in more, I've noticed. It's like I have a buddy of mine likes to go to concerts, and it's really sweet of him, and he always invites me all the time. He always invites me. And I'll go to a concert every once in a while, but I'm like, yo, dude, like, I have a 4-year-old. Like, I'm not out of the house after 9 o'clock most of the time. It's like that's not a rule, but it's actually to try to live a little bit more simply and not have to do so much. Because I can appreciate that that's enough for right now. So the response to pleasure that we're trying to slow down and practice with is actually to fully embrace it. Not to say, oh, the Buddha said desire means suffering. No, he didn't say that. Yeah, if you crave or cling after it, it causes suffering. But actually be in the moment of pleasure fully, knowing that it's impermanent. Why do Buddhists do death contemplation? It's actually to help us with this. It's not a morbid reflection, although it is pretty metal and kind of drew me into Buddhism a little more. But it's actually because we have to realize life is very precious. And when there are really joyful, pleasant, beautiful moments in life, they're really precious moments. You know, my daughter's only going to be 4 once. It's like she's going to be a teenager one day and want nothing to do with me. I'm like, you know. But also, I can't cling to that either as she gets older. It's like really hard. The Buddha's like, middle path, dog. Yeah, enjoy it, and it's going to pass. It's like every day she's getting older. I'm like, don't get older. Oh, I got to let go. Oh, but I can be present. This is really nice. It's like trying to be in the middle. When things are painful, when things are hard in our life, to fully embrace the pain, to say, okay, this is how it is right now, with compassion. I feel this, I care about this, I'm here for this. You know, I think my mind started learning that when I'm experiencing something emotionally painful, that it's just going to come with me for a while. Like, I don't know if I can articulate this, but it's almost like, it used to be, why am I feeling this? And how do I figure this out or figure myself out or improve myself more so I don't feel this anymore? And now it's kind of like, okay, I feel this, and I guess this is going to be here for a while. It's kind of like a little buddy that I got in my body that's just like, all right, you can come along today, sadness or loneliness or sickness. It's like, all right, sickness, let's go, you know. Things are going to be a little different because you're here, but that's all right. And that, I feel like, is what compassion is for me, is feeling with the pain. And it used to be like, okay, I'm going to have tons of compassion so I don't feel pain anymore. I'm like, shit, that's aversion. That's aversion. That's pushing it away. Damn it. So it's like, you know, the Buddha doesn't really give us an escape. Bhikkhu Bodhi says, he's a monk and has written a lot of books on Buddhism. He even says in one of his books, he says, with all escape routes blocked, we're forced to find a way to bring our disquietude to an end. And that's by realizing that there is no end on your terms. Like, it's just going to be here. You just got to be with it. So we meet pleasant moments with non-attached appreciation. We meet painful moments with compassion, with being with them, being patient with them. Trying to not get sucked into the narrative sometimes. That's not so helpful when we're in pain, but also not trying to push away the pain. So this is what the trained disciple does in the Buddha's sutta. The trained disciple is the one that practices, and I love this, because actually the Buddha's not being judgmental. He's saying the untaught worldling just simply doesn't know. They're untaught. The trained disciple, it's not that they know something special, they've trained themselves. Going back to what I said earlier, it's not that they believe in the Buddhist teaching, they've trained themselves through mindfulness. They see clearly a moment of pleasure and they embrace it with non-attached appreciation. They see clearly a moment of pain and they embrace it fully with compassion. They see clearly a moment of neutrality. We didn't talk a lot about neutral feelings, which mostly very quickly go away because we can't tolerate neutrality that easily. It's like quickly moves into boredom. Like my threshold for having a good time is like intensity or boredom. There used to be. So with neutral feelings, we fully show up. It's like, it's all right now. And through training, we develop. In meditation, this is what we're doing. This is what we're doing. We're breathing, and whatever is arising, we're noticing it. And we're letting it come and go on its own time. All experiences self-liberate. Right? And this may sound out there, but they do. Just watch. The thought will change. The feeling will change. The sensation will change. Even when you have something like depression, I can say this because I'm someone that has experienced this insidious mind state, mood disturbance of depression. It changes. Sometimes it's heavy, sometimes it's like a thick fog, sometimes it's light. And then periods of the season, it's completely gone, and the clouds lifted. You know, mindfulness can really actually help you track things like this. Like, it's kind of heavier, it's kind of lighter. These are the stories that the mind's saying in this mind state. So we get to practice this actively through mindfulness. And the result is, as we sit and we watch things come and go, and we sit and we watch and we acknowledge what's happening in the moment, we see it clearly, we develop what is called equanimity. This word in Pali Sanskrit, upekkha, which means there in the middleness. We develop more of an ability to show up in the middle of our lives, whether it's pleasurable, painful, or otherwise. And to be okay. Right? I think about how much time my mind wastes in running around in its distractions and its delusions. And I still do it, but it's just such a waste of time. It's like this human birth, this time that we have is so precious. It's so precious, and I've wasted so much time in castles in my mind. Self-made prisons. Right? It's like attributed to Mark Twain. He said, the worst moments of my life never came true. You know, how much of just this stuff is like just extra? Equanimity is this ability to just see it clearly and say, maybe that will happen. We'll have to wait and see. But I'm not going to let it rob my happiness right now. That's been one of my favorite things that I tell my mind now when it tells me some very valid concern about one of the many important things that I've got going on in my life, is I just tell my mind, maybe. Yeah. And what I've found is it's not like I'm dismissing. The near enemy of equanimity is like indifference. It's kind of like whatever. It's like not engaging with life. I've actually found that the more equanimous I am, the more engaged I am. Because I don't know about y'all, but the more overwhelmed I feel, the more I put shit off. And you know what overwhelms me? The bullshit in my mind. That's what overwhelms me. So the less overwhelmed I am, I tell my mind, maybe that'll happen. I don't know. The more engaged I am with what's in front of me. Equanimity is this ability to respond to life on life's terms, to the present moment, however you want to put it. Ajahn Sumedho, one of the Thai forest monks, summed up really the Buddhist teachings. I think he was talking about equanimity, but he summed it up with the phrase, right now it's like this. Right now it's like this. Fully coming into the experience. Right now it's like this. And then I found that as I slow down and I come into the experience, I can more skillfully engage. Right? Because the piece that I haven't talked about, but it is a big piece of the Buddhist teachings, is how do we actually skillfully engage with the world? And if I want to show up to the best of my ability, I want to know that I'm not coming from a reactive place. So I've found that if I can really take care of this, not that it's in order, but it kind of needs to be my foundation. If I can take care of what's happening in here, then I'm able to more clearly engage in a responsive way rather than a reactive way out here. And you know, the other cool thing I'll say really quick about how we engage in Buddhism, you know, it is actually all about the intention. And I know these days, there's a lot to be said about the difference between intention and impact, and I agree with that. But when you're really looking at your motivations behind your behavior through a mindful lens, really accountable to your motivations, you can't control the outcome. You never have been able to, and you never will. So when you're coming from a place of trying your best to live in a way that doesn't cause harm, in a way that's honest, in a way that's kind, in a way that offers grace to people and forgiveness, and that can communicate effectively, when you're really trying to live from that place, isn't that ever only the best we can do? If we run around and say, you should be this way, or you should do this way, we should be this way, what problem are we really solving? It's just a thought, because I really feel like people are so hard on themselves. You know, and so we can be more skillful when we slow down and we investigate our mind and we try our best. That's the people I want to hang around, is the people that are really trying their best. And they may fuck it up, and then we'll talk about it. You know, but your best is all you can ever do. So I think y'all are doing a great job. If no one's told you that recently, I think you're doing a great job. So some of my thoughts, second arrow.
What's up, y'all? Reverend Mikey Noshel here from Wild Heart Meditation Center in Nashville, Tennessee. Thanks for checking us out. Do me a favor, please like and subscribe. And if you feel moved to leave a donation, you can do so at wildheartmeditationcenter.org or the Venmo link in the description. Peace and love.